Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Neon City Rumble from Booyah Games. As you can tell from the cover of this game, this is steeped in the 90s and the beat-em-ups of that time period. It looks like a Sega Genesis cartridge. I remember them well from my youth. That was my system of choice. But there were also a lot of these side-scrolling beat-em-up games back then, like Streets of Rage and Final Fight and Two Crude Dudes or Two Rude Dudes. Whatever it was. Tons and tons of games like that. And this game is trying to evoke those types of feelings, as well as things like Kung Fury is what immediately leapt to mind. I don't know which came first, this game or Kung Fury, but definitely got a lot of that vibe to it as well. The storyline of the game is kind of confusing. It's like there is this nuclear silo, and they were celebrating with a fighting tournament when it was being built. And everyone that was there got covered in toxic waste, and they become these super-powered gang members, and now you're duking it out in the city with different teams of fighters. And there's different team modes and things like that, but I just focused on the 1 versus 1, team of fighters versus team of fighters, duke it out, beat each other up in the overview. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played, then we're going to come back, I'll let you know what I think. Alright, let me give you a quick rundown of Neon City Rumble. This is a competitive game for 2 players. Each player is going to take control of a team of fighters, and your goal is to eliminate the other player's team. Now, there are different game modes that you can play as. You can play as a team mode. You can play with a limited amount of fighters, but the main way to play is having 5 different fighters, 3 that are in your Rumble area, and 2 that are on the bench that can come out when your other fighters have gone down or when you want to swap them out. But your goal is just to eliminate your player's team of 5 fighters. Now, there's a few different things to note here. You have the play mat and the play area where you're going to have your rumblers. This is where you stick your different fighters that are actually going to be in play. And you'll be playing cards in front of them. You're going to have the pit stop area and the junkyard. The junkyard is where cards that go when they've been used from the pit stop. Any of the cards that are in the pet stop area may eventually end up in the junkyard, in other words. You have weapons, items, you have neon, and you have brawl cards. Now, each player is actually going to start off with 3 brawl cards and a random neon card. You also are going to start off with your team of fighters. Now, you are going to draft your fighters one by one, passing the cards back and forth until you have your set of 5 fighters, and they all have lots of different special abilities. Here, I'll just go ahead and zero in on the main stats on each of these characters. You have their hit points up top. You'll keep track of those actually with the little dice that come with the game. So as they take damage, you'll wind those down. Underneath that, you're going to, and this is actually their revival cost, when they need to be revived, which it can only happen once per fighter per game. That's the cost you have to pay. Underneath that, you have their Brawl Mastery and their Item Mastery. This is going to increase the effectiveness of these certain types of attacks when they're applied. So, for instance, if you use one of the ducking defenses with Vlad the Impaler here, he's going to get a +1. If you use the knife, he also gets a +1 to that effectiveness as well. Then you're going to have strikes and counters. Strikes and counters are very powerful moves that can be used when they apply. So, for instance, there'll be a strike phase at the start of each turn where you can have the opportunity to use one of your strike powers, or you'll also, whenever you have the opportunity to counter, you can use this ability instead. But they are commensurate with their extreme power. They also have an extreme cost, which is in neon. So you need to use 2 of these green neons in order to activate the strike, whereas you need 1 of these and 1 of the yellow one in order to use the counter strike. I'll show you some of the other characters in the games to give you a taste for what their personalities are like. You have Rihanna, Udu, Beatman, Blockum, Kiefer, Lock and Noki, Sphinx, Squirrel Boy, Toro, Wolfenstein, Nightclub Ninja, Fifi Omegazoid, Louis the Orangutan, E. Harira, Ash Blitzer, who's like the title character, Mikiri Miura, and Shiori, and they all have different abilities, and some of them, like Shiori, actually have to do with the sex of your opponent. So Shiori says that all of your opponent's male fighters receive -1 defense when engaging Shiori during this combat round. And just to show you some of the cards that come in the other decks, here are some items. You have food, like the burrito here. User recovers 3 hit points. Now, you're going to play these the same way that you're going to actually play the Brawl cards, and we'll get to all that in a moment. And in the same way, your opponent can try and cancel them out. So that's what it says up front here. So when you place this down on the board, your opponent can easily see canceled by a block card. You have the one of the many gamble cards is Lucky Sevens. Draw any item of your choice from the junkyard. This is canceled by a parry. There's a lot of VHS tapes like Streets of Age here, which says that you roll one of the green dice that comes with the game. Opponent must discard. If you roll a 1, opponent must discard all items from hand. A 2 through 5, opponent must discard all neon from hand. And on a 6, opponent must discard all brawl from their hand. But this is canceled by a jump. Here's an example of one of the wall cards, which is going to increase your defense. The user gains +3, and you discard it after use. Now there are weapon cards with the red back on them. You have the machine gun. This is going to be canceled by a duck. You flip a coin. There is a metal coin that comes with the game. Maybe not all copies of the game, but at least the one that I have does. If heads, opposing fighter takes 2 damage. If tails, all of your opponent's fighters on the tarmac take 2 damage. Then you have the pipe bomb. Fighters on the bench take 2 damage. The broken bottle. Flip a coin. If heads, opposing fighter takes 1 damage. If tails, opposing fighter at this location takes a damage and can't use strikes or counters during the next combat round, although that can be canceled out by a parry. And here are the neon cards. Neons are the fuel you're going to use in order to use your strikes and counter strikes, and they can also be canceled out by other opposing types of neon. So in other words, chrome can cancel out the Ultra Rage neon, but the Ultra Rage neon also cancels out Cosmo. There'll be little visual cues to remind yourself of how these are going to be used. And it counts as 3 of that type when used as combat for this particular card. There's Super Chrome, there's Natural Cosmo, there's all these different types. And finally, there are the Brawl cards, which are going to be the most commonly used cards in the game. These are your attack and defense against what your opponent is throwing at you. They're always defense cards are always going to cancel out a certain type of attack. So if I was choosing to, if I was the defender and my opponent was throwing an uppercut at me, I could play this defense duck as to cancel that out, and I can also boost it by spending the appropriate type of neon to become more effective. There's also, if I use it on this side for attacking, I would get to do a sweep attack. There's defend, parry, and attack uppercut. Defend, jump. Notice it cancels and can get boosted again. Different symbols: attack, kick, defend, block, and attack, punch. All these different things. It can be boosted up to 2 times. Then there are Sucker Punch cards. You're actually going to have 4 of these at random, but you'll remove 2 of them from the deck and then put the randomly, and then put the other 2 back into the deck. These are special defensive cards that can be canceled out by a sweep. But you roll a die. Both on a 1, both fighters take 1 damage. 2 through 5, opponents take 2 damage, and on a 6, opponents take 3 damage. However, they are queued into a particular. Each one is queued into a different particular type. So, this type of Sucker Punch is canceled by a sweep. This one is canceled by a kick, and so on. So, how the typical turn structure is going to work. At the beginning of the game, you're going to randomly determine through a coin flip, if you want, who is going to be player 1. And that's going to alternate. So, I'll be player 1, then the next player is going to get a chance to be the player 1, which would be the attacker. And then you're going to go through your turn structure. The first thing you're going to do is have the opportunity to use your strikes by fueling them potentially with neon. The next thing you're going to do is attack and defense. This is where the attacker is going to play Brawl cards down in front of each of his fighters, or potentially item cards as well. And the defender is also going to play cards in order to defend against those attacks or cancel out those items. And it's always the fighters who are directly in front of each other who are going to be affecting each other unless they have some sort of special ability. Now, if you are down to your last fighter, there's a desperation rule where that last fighter gets to influence all 3 fighters. His attacks will hit all 3 of his opponents' still standing fighters. Once both players have locked in their decisions, then you flip over cards one by one or all at once, although the defender is going to get a chance to, obviously I would have had things in different order, but then the defender is going to get a chance to resolve things in whatever order that they wish. The defender is going to get that option. Then you'll decide whether damage is dealt, whether attacks are canceled, and so on. Once you get done resolving all of the cards that were used in the players were using to attack or defend, then it's going to be time to do the counter strike potentially. Whoever is the defending player has the opportunity to use the counters on their fighters if they have the neon to fuel them, following the same rules as the strikes. And of course, the other player can try and use their neon to cancel out the neon that they're using in order to make their counters. Now, once a round of combat is done, then players can actually take a pit stop. This is where they get to go to these different item decks here and either sell cards, bank cards, or purchase new cards. If you want to sell a card for its cost that is on the other side, for instance, items say that they give you 2 credits when you turn them in, you need to bank a card, and then on the next pit stop, you can actually turn it in for cash. This is also where you're going to reset back to 3 Brawl cards in hand. Or I should say drawing 3 Brawl cards, since you might have some more left over. Now, neon is something that you can buy, but it should also be noted that when you take out an opponent's fighter, you'll also be able to draw a neon. And if you do an overkill, which is dealing excess damage to one of your opponents, you draw an extra neon card for every excess damage that you have. And that is just a really quick overview of what you can expect in Neon City Rumble. It's obviously a bit more complicated than that with the combat, and there are different game modes, but hopefully that gives you just a taste of what you can expect from the game. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. Alright, I always start off talking about theme and components. I'll start off with the good about that aspect of it. I love the artwork in this game. I think it's fantastic. I do think that some of the females in the game, maybe all of the females, are depicted in a very lewd way. I might even borderline on sexist. But I think that if you take it in the spirit that it is, a sort of pulpy, again, 90s type feel, uber comic book / anime type style, you can appreciate it a bit more. And I think it looks fantastic. I love like the pixel style art in some areas, and the way the box looks. All this different thing gives a very evocative theme that I really appreciate. And that's very good, because the rest of the components, not so good. Paper mat, terrible. Terrible idea. I wish that they had not done that. I really wish that they hadn't. I don't know. To keep the game small, to keep it more affordable, I guess they had to. But to be honest, it's probably better if you played the game a couple times, do without it, because it's so annoying, it doesn't sit right, all that different things. The other parts of the game are okay. The tiny dice are kind of weird, but kind of neat, I guess. And the coin is okay. I mean, if it gives you a coin. I mean, you don't really need it, but there you go. You have it, but I hate that paper mat. But anyways, the artwork is good and presentation. The theme, I mean, it's a head-to-head fighting game, but all the little bits of pop culture and like the send-ups of the Genesis games and VHS tapes and all that in the item deck, that's really fun. So I dig all that kind of stuff. And especially if you're a kid of the 90s who was into those types of games, you'll appreciate it that much more. Moving on to the gameplay, a lot of it is very interesting. I love, again, it goes into the theme, but the idea of going to the pit stop and getting the different items that you can eat and recover health, and the way that the card system works with the Brawl cards is also very interesting, using attack and defense cards and boosting them potentially with neon. There's a couple of things about that, though, I'm not too keen on. First off, it's very difficult to get neon. I kind of want the game, it has this feel of being big and flashy and like going all out, but it can be really hard to store up that neon and make a big attack that might ultimately fail. This game is super random. You wouldn't think that. I mean, especially since it is deterministic, you're putting down Brawl cards on the different fighters and having them duke it out with the others. But the thing is, it's very difficult to anticipate what your opponent is going to do. And it's very difficult for your opponent to anticipate what you are going to do. So that ends up feeling random at a certain degree until you really get into the game and feel like what your special abilities and powers are, or what you're best at, and then you can maybe make some surmisings, if I'm using that word correctly, to figure out what your opponent's going to do. But that's very tough to do, and even if you do get a shot off, especially with the strikes and the counters, a lot of it is rolling a die and seeing what happens, and sometimes if you roll poorly, it even hits you back. So that's a bit of an odd thing. You never really feel like this uber powerful fighter too much. It feels like everything's just up to like the whims of what your opponent happens to choose and what the dice are going to come up as. The whole thing with building your team is very interesting, but a lot of the fighters feel very similar, and some of them definitely feel better than others, especially ones that require the genders of the opposing team to be of a certain gender type, in which case it's like, well, why would I take something that's selectively useful as opposed to something I can use all the time and is always good or at least okay? I never felt that the gender-specific powers or the very specific powers are so good that it makes up for that. So that's an interesting thing. But at a certain point, they're very similar to each other, so you just pick the flavorful ones you want. Anyways, I do think that I wish that the game wasn't total elimination, because in that regard, and this is just talking about the main mode, by the way, it can go on for quite a bit longer than it probably should. I think that you get the flavor of this game very quickly, and it goes on a bit longer than that flavor really comes out. I think, in fact, the recovery aspect thing is not a great idea. I think you die, get through it, keep going. Whoever wins, wins. Having to be able to recover everyone one time is like the equivalent of putting money in free parking. It's just adding more money into circulation, and it's just prolonging the game unnecessarily. But other aspects of the game, of the fighting, I do like. I do like the whole aspect of, going boom, 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 putting the cards down and then seeing what happens, and hoping that you can outwit your opponent. There is some skill there if the cards align right, and if you have at least some clues as to what they might want to play based on what's out there. But again, you never quite know that. And again, I wish that Neon was a bit easier to get, but I do like the whole pit stop aspect, banking cards, trading them in later. I might wish it was a little bit easier to get those cards and to turn in for money. Maybe instead of hoping that, killing an opponent and getting one piece of neon, you get a whole pile of cash. Then you have more options of getting more items or more weapons and things like that to really outfit your crew in a certain way. So I wish there was a bit more of that customization, because the game feels very tight as it is, maybe a little bit too restrictive in some areas. But overall, I think that the theme comes out very well. I think that the idea is pretty sound there. I think, with a little bit of tightening it up, it could be really, really great. That's something that really can't be home ruled away. The rule book could definitely use some work, though, so it's going to take you a couple plays under your belt to really get through it. But there's a solid idea here. I'd like to see it get fine-tuned a little bit with maybe some better components and really bring that theme out, because it is a great theme and has some great artwork. As it is now, it's okay. That is Neon City Rumble from Booyah Games. Check it out if you're a kid of the 90s. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.